everyone. In our video today, we're going to take a look at how to score a standardized instrument. And for our video today, we're going to use the PPVT or Peabody Picture Vocabulary Test, 4th edition, by Lloyd and Douglas Dunn, published by Pearson Assessments. This is a really good example of a standardized instrument. In this case, it's a norm-referenced standardized instrument that uses direct administration. So for this assessment, we sit down with the child one-on-one and give them prompts to assess their receptive vocabulary. But today's video is about scoring. So we're going to focus most of our time on the record book. This is the book where you write down the child's responses as you're giving the assessment, or I should say person's responses, because the PPVT goes all the way through adulthood. This is a sample, and as you can see, I have filled out the front so that we can identify our child, sample, and all the relevant information for her. Particularly of interest for the PPVT is the current grade or level of education completed. This is significant because we can choose for the PPVT to use age-based norms or grade-based norms, fall and spring. And that's intentional to be able to look at the growth during an academic year and from academic year to academic year. In this case, we're going to use the age-based norms because our little girl's actually 4, so she's not yet in primary school. The grade-based norms in the PPVT run kindergarten through 12th grade. So in this case, we're going to use the age-based norms. And this is the front page of the record book, and in most cases with direct administration instruments where there's a lot of pages to your record book, your main scores are going to roll up to the front of your book so that when it's closed you can still see the child's or student's or person's raw score and various standardized scores on the front. Essentially, we're going to take all the data from inside and bring it up to the front and then apply it to this profile so we can see on a normal curve, this is a norm-referenced instrument, on the normal curve where the child has scored. I also want to point out that most instruments ask you to calculate the child's age, especially if you're going to use an age-based norm. And in this case, it asks you for the test date and the child's birth date and to calculate the age and to not round up. Our child today is 4 years and 6 months old. Okay, so now let's look inside the record book and see what we need to do next. So the PPVT, like a lot of instruments, is really nice that in the front of the record book you get a lot of information about administering the instrument and then a lot of information about scoring the instrument. And it tells us to begin the scoring process, we're going to calculate a raw score. And we're going to do that by totaling the number of errors in the various sets. Please see my video on administering the PPVT if you are looking to understand basal sets and ceiling sets. This was administered correctly, starting with a basal set of set 2 for an age 4-year-old child, and ending with the ceiling set for this little girl of set 12, which is the set in which she made 8 or more errors. In this case, it was 10 errors in set 12. So this is quite a number of sets that were administered for a 4-year-old. And so the instrument tells us that we need to begin by calculating the total number of errors for each of the sets that we administered, going from the basal set to the ceiling set. So I am going to transfer up, I'll show you, my data from the actual administration of the assessment. So you see in set 2 she had 1 error, and in set 3 she had 0 errors. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer up to this box. So set 2 she had 1 error, and set 3 she had 0 errors. I'm looking down below. Set 4 she had 0 errors. Set 5 she had 2 errors. Set 6 she had 1 error. Okay, now I need to sneak to the next page. Set 7 she had 2 errors. Set 8 she had 1 error. Set 9 she had 6 errors. This is where it starts to get hard for our little friend. Set 10, she had 5 errors. Set 11, she had 6 errors. And set 12, she had 10 errors. So that was the ceiling set, okay? So then what we need to do is to add up all of these numbers. So essentially this is just a sum of the total errors, and it says here, which you probably can't see on the video, between basal set and ceiling set. So we're just gonna add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 13, 18, 24, 34. And like all standardized assessments, when you're scoring, I recommend that you count twice, once going forward and once going backwards, so you don't tend to make the same mathematical mistake more than once. So 16, 21, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34. So I get 34 both times. So I can be pretty sure that it's actually 34. You could, of course, use a calculator for this if you'd like. I tend to, these small ones, just to sort of do in my head. Okay, and then it tells us how to calculate the raw score. So it tells us that we need the number of the ceiling item, which in this case is the last item number in the ceiling set. Okay? And so the ceiling set for her was set 12. So the final item number in the ceiling set is 144. So we're going to put 144 on the line. Of particular importance here in the PPVT is that in the ceiling set you do administer through the end of the set. So it isn't like some instruments where you stop after 8 errors. You administer through the end of that set, and that's significant because that is where you get that number. Also of significance in that set, she got item number 144 correct. Okay, so then we take our ceiling item and we subtract our total errors. So in this case, it's 34. Oh, and we're gonna get a nice round 110 for a raw score. Okay, so then it says transfer this raw score to the record form cover. So when I tell you when you're administering and scoring instruments, read the directions, read them again, I mean that. Read the directions, read them again. It walks you step by step through what you're supposed to do. Okay, so this 110 is going to our front cover for the child's raw score, right? Also on the front cover, it tells us from box on page 2, this box to this box, okay? Now it is up to us to calculate the standard scores. And like everything else on this instrument, we have a lot of guidance. So it says standard score, use table B1, B2, or B3. In this case, they're referring to us to a table in the manual, which is what you're going to have in every single standardized instrument, to look at a table in the manual. And we're being directed to B1, B2, or B3. So, table B1 on this instrument is standard scores corresponding to the raw scores by age and form. Table B2 is standard scores corresponding to raw scores by grade in the fall and form. Remember with the PPVT, there's 2 forms, a Form A and a Form B. We're actually using Form A today. And table B3 is standard scores corresponding to raw scores by grade in the spring. So if you were going to use the grade-based norms, you would use B2 or B3, depending upon whether it was the fall or the spring. In this case, we're going to use the age-based norms again because our little friend is younger than primary age. So we need to go to table B1. And the first thing that we're going to do is find her age. As you can see, this says ages 3.8 through 3.9, so that's not old enough yet. We need 4.6. Okay, so this page right here, which of course is not great for our video, is 4.6 to 4.7. So we're going to take a look at Form A in 4.6 to 4.7, and we're going to find her raw score. So her raw score was 110. So if we go down here to 109 to 110 for Form A, it tells us that the standard score is 127. And the next thing it tells us is a confidence interval. Okay, so a confidence interval is a statistical calculation that takes into account the anticipated error in the assessment, okay? If this child took the same assessment twice, there would be some natural error. And it tells us at a 90% confidence interval, if the raw score was 109 to 110, we're absolutely sure her standard score, we're 90% sure, I shouldn't say absolutely sure, we're 90% sure that her standardized score is actually somewhere between 122 and 131. Okay, this table does provide us a 90% confidence interval and a 95% confidence interval. For most education-based tasks, we're going to go ahead and use the 90% confidence interval. We usually use 95% confidence intervals for things that are more, decisions that are more, that have greater potential sort of risk to them. Medical decisions, diagnostic decisions. If we were using this as part of a diagnostic, we might be interested in looking at the 95% confidence interval. And if you take a look, I'm not sure if you can see, but I can read you the numbers. The 95% confidence interval is that if her raw score is 110, her standardized score is with 95% confidence, it is somewhere between 121 and 132. So you see, when we make the our percentage higher, it makes our range larger because we have to capture more numbers. But for our purpose today, we're going to say that it's a standard score of 127 with a confidence interval of 122 to 131 using a 90% confidence level. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and transfer that onto here. So we said her standard score was 127, and we are going to use a 90% confidence interval today, and then I just need to double check because I've said so many numbers out loud. It's 122 to 131. Okay, so we're 90% confident that her score is somewhere between 122 and 131. All right, so then we're going to go ahead and find a percentile, okay? And it tells us to use table B4. So we're going to go ahead and flip in our book to table B4. These are all of our grade-based norms, which we don't need right now. And we find table B4, which calculates percentiles, NCEs, which is normal curve equivalents, and stanines. You can see it's divided into the 9 sections of stanines. We'll go ahead and find them. I'm really interested in the percentile in this particular breakdown because we're going to be able to plot it on the curve, and we'll see all of these other things as well once they're on the curve. But we'll go ahead and fill them out on the front box just so you can see how we do them. So we're going to look up, in this case, her standard score. So for this child, the standard score was 127. So we're looking at the 96th percentile. Yes, this is, this little friend is her receptive vocabulary is pretty strong, okay? And then the normal curve equivalent is 88. And the stanine is 9, so she's in the highest stanine value. We actually cannot find a growth scale value right now. Growth scale values are used to calculate when you have a pre and post. And in this case, we don't. We could go ahead and find one, but since we don't have a pre and post, so we're not really looking at a growth scale, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to calculate that right now. And then this instrument does produce age equivalent and grade equivalent scores. And I know you've heard me say before that I don't like these scores because they are very confusing to families because they tend to not mean what it seems like they mean. I often give the example of taking a reading test in middle school, and you get a score back saying that you're reading at the grade equivalent for your reading level is 12.5. Well, the issue with that is very frequently you're reading 6th grade material and scoring about as well as the average 12th grader. It does not, in that case, indicate the child is reading at the 12th grade level, which is what it looks like from the report. In the PPVT, the age equivalent and the grade equivalents are a little bit stronger because the test itself gets progressively more difficult, right? So in these upper levels, when she was answering those questions, you can see that the ceiling set for her was set 12, and this is the starting set for a child who's 14 to 16 years of age. So these vocabulary, if you take a look at them, polluting, injecting, fern, mammal, this is not the kind of receptive vocabulary that we would expect a 4-year-old to be able to answer, as opposed to if we look back to our initial set of, you know, pencil, drum, turtle, red. Those are the kinds of things we'd expect to be asking a 4-year-old. So in this instrument, I don't think it's super bad to go ahead and calculate an age equivalent. We're not going to do a grade equivalent. Once again, she's not in the school system yet. She is in public school preschool, but this instrument is not grade equivalent normed down to preschool. So if we are going to find the grade age equivalent, it tells us to look at table B5. Okay, so then, and for this table you have to be careful because it's telling you to look up the raw score. So for our little girl, the raw score was 110, and we're looking at Form A. So 110, Form A, it tells us that the age equivalent is 6 years and 8 months. Okay? So she's 4 years and 6 months old, so that's why she's showing as a percentile, a 96th percentile. Okay, so the age equivalent is 6 years and 8 months. Okay, we are almost done with this instrument. We're not going to go ahead and score a grade level, but we actually could. If we were curious, and the raw score of 110 corresponds to 1 month into first grade, okay, which is about the same as 6-8. So we can go ahead and do this one. 1 month into first grade. Okay. Note the difference in writing. Most test manufacturers use this abbreviation. So 6:8 is 6 years, 8 months, and 1.1 is first grade, 1 month. Sometimes there's not a lot of explanation to that, but that's typically the breakdown that they use. I've seen others, I've seen dashes involved, but most instances it's 6:8 for age months. And they use a decimal or a period when they're talking about grade equivalents. Okay, so then one of the nice things about this instrument is we get a graphic right here, which is really what we care about. So if we take a look, this one says standard score, so we can go ahead over here and we can plot her standard score, and her standard score was 127. Now, of particular interest here is going back to that confidence interval. We're definitely not 100% sure that her score was actually 127. And if you take a look at 127 on this instrument, we can go ahead and plot that on here, and you can see 127 is just inside the second deviation, right? So she's clearly in this moderately high score, but I think what's interesting here is if we look at the confidence interval, we're 90% confident that her score is actually between 122 and 131, which bridges that standard deviation. So it is possible that her score is actually outside of 2 standard deviations, which makes it pretty different in terms of how we consider it. She's somewhere between the high end of a moderately high score and an extremely high score, the low end of an extremely high score. Okay. We also can see we calculated the percentile, but if we were just to carry this line down, we would get the same concept. It's right around 96. The same thing with the normal curve equivalent. If we were to sort of carry this down, it'd be about an 88, and the Stanine is 9. Okay, and that is how you do the overall standardized scoring for this particular instrument. My recommendations for this child is that the teachers and staff that are working with her in preschool should probably recognize that she has a fairly extensive receptive vocabulary for a preschooler. I did think it was very interesting while she was taking the assessment with me that a lot of times she would tell me what the word meant that I was asking her. I would ask her something like predatory, and she would say, well, it can't be that one because those two animals don't eat each other. And it can't be that one because those are two pandas and they're eating bamboo, not each other. It has to be that one because the lion eats that animal. Okay, so she clearly understood what the term predatory was, and she was demonstrating her thinking process as she was figuring out which one was which. So in this case, I think it would be significant for her classroom teachers to know that her vocabulary is fairly extensive, and she's probably ready for some introduction of more rare words and more content-specific vocabulary than your average 4-year-old is. It's interesting to note and could potentially change the way that her teachers support her as she continues to foster her own receptive vocabulary growth and her expressive vocabulary growth. I should say Pearson does make a companion assessment called the EVT, the Expressive Vocabulary Test, to take a look at expressive vocabulary. But the PPVT is expressly for comprehension of receptive vocabulary in American Standard English. I hope this helps a little bit with how to score a standardized instrument. The PPVT also does provide for you, and I have not filled it out for this child, you can take a look at which parts of speech the students are being successful with versus having more challenges with. It's divided into verbs, nouns, and attributes. And each item is indicated which one it is, and you can take a look at the number answered and the number correct for each parts of vocabulary. Which can help us when we're working with students who have a bit more challenges around vocabulary. It would be interesting to know in her case if there is a particular part of speech that she has a larger receptive vocabulary in as compared to the others. So that's it for our Scoring a Standardized Instrument video. Thank you to Pearson and the PPVT for being our sample instrument today. I tried really hard not to zoom in close enough so that we could copy any of the PPVT's attributes. As always, let me know if you have questions. You know the email.